Given Bentley's sales success today, it's hard to imagine that back at the turn of the 80s, the percentage of Bentley badged crew-built cars was down to around 3%, and in fact there were plans to kill off the brand altogether. Fortunately, an alternative plan prevailed, which saw 3 key models introduced in the 80s that would deliver sales success for that decade and beyond. First was the Mulsanne Turbo of 1982, the Turbo R of 1985, and in between those two, there was this, the Bentley Eight, introduced 40 years ago this year in 1984. This entry-level model was part of that sales success. But what's it like to drive today? Well, we've got this glorious 1987 example here to find out. So here we are in a Bentley 8. It's really hard to imagine now that Bentley was for so many years the poor relation out of the 2 crew-built car makers. Rolls Royce and Bentley had been together since the early 30s, and yet there was still so much uncertainty about what to do with the Bentley brand. The way it was generally perceived was that Bentley was the sporty model and Rolls Royce was all about luxury and opulence. But in all cases, Bentley just accounted for such a small percentage of total sales that certainly by the time the car company was separate from the aviation business in the late 70s, there was a real deliberation as over to what to do with the brand. The sales were so low of Bentley badge products, of all derivatives, that there was a genuine thought that they should perhaps even kill the brand off altogether. Fortunately, there was a more ambitious plan afoot, which would see 3 distinct models turn Bentley around and really give it an identity and a confidence all of its own. One of the key things they wanted to do was to create almost like an entry-level version, one that could appeal to perhaps someone who was new to the brand, but still aspired to have some sporting luxury. So the Bentley 8 was introduced in 1984, 2 years after the flagship Mulsanne Turbo model. And it came in at a deliberately sort of entry-level price, just sneaking in below £50,000. So with that lower list price, it was really important that Bentley didn't make it feel like they'd skimped, so they were quite judicious with how they pared back the specification. So to that end, the exterior temperature gauge and the clock were no longer digital, they were analog. The map pockets in the back of the front seats were mesh netting initially rather than full leather pockets. Leather was an extra cost option. The lambswool rugs were removed, and the companion mirror at the back was also deleted as well off that C-pillar. The wood veneer was also distinct for the 8 as well. From an exterior point of view, you just got a mesh grille instead of the regular fins that you got on the standard Mulsanne cars. And from 1989, the full units were replaced by twin headlights as well, which I have to say I really like them. They've been retrofitted on this 1987 example, and I think it looks fabulous. But overall, it still felt special, and they could sell it for £5,700 cheaper than the Mulsanne model. As it was aimed at a younger, more sporting buyer, they decided to offer the stiffer front suspension to give it slightly more eager turning. It was quite clear it was being designed for the driver as opposed to someone who was being chauffeured around, which might be typical of a Rolls Royce customer. Originally the Bentley 8 was intended as purely a UK market car, but I think such was the perceived popularity of it, it was eventually put on sale in both Europe and North America to a good success, it has to be said. Under the bonnet, it's very much all standard fare. It's very similar to other Bentley and Rolls Royces of that era. So to that end, we've got the 6.75 V8 engine, mated to a 3-speed auto, top speed of allegedly around 120 miles an hour, and you're looking at a 0 to 60 time of just over 10 seconds. So not exactly rapid by modern standards. But it wasn't about necessarily point and shoot acceleration. It was about sort of a graceful and yet determined progress. That's what you could make in a Bentley 8. As with all other SZ generation models, the big update came in 1987, so we got things like standard ABS, we got a revised dashboard and improved interior trim, a leather trim steering wheel instead of a sort of a standard Bakelite one, adjustable leather seats. The quad headlights came in 1989, 2 years later. There was also an improved engine management system from 87 and adaptive damping control for the first time. Production continued right away through to 1992. By that point, the standard Mulsanne, so not the Turbo, the Mulsanne and the 8 were then merged together under one model called the Brooklands. But by that point, The 50,000 starting price had now risen to over £80,000. So what's it like to drive? Well, there's nothing quite like driving a Bentley, I've got to say, and I've not driven many in my time. We had a Turbo R on fleet for a while, and there'll be other videos you can see in our back catalogue about those. But it's just something special, and it's hard to put your finger on quite what. First of all, there's the sheer presence of driving something like this. I'm sitting imperiously high up. I'm looking down this glorious bonnet with the Bentley B emblem down the front there. This dashboard is simplicity and yet class. It's just beautiful. I love the way it's laid out. This example is Immaculate, by the way. It's a beautiful example, and it just looks splendid. I love the big gauges, and even by it's got these modern switchgear and stuff by traditional standards, it still looks so classic and traditional. It's wonderful. These seats are glorious. They're flat, but they're beautifully padded. They're so comfortable. It kind of wafts along. It sort of glides along. It feels solid. And with that V8 engine, if you want to put your foot down, it's got such a purposeful growl. But it's not rough. It's smooth and purposeful. The steering, we've got rack and pinion power assisted steering by this point, but it's still a little bit vague, I would say, but it's lovely and light to feel. It's just really easy. You feel you could drive it with your fingertips. This is a car that weighs 2,300 kilos. That's over £5,000 in old school money. What we've got to realise is that Bentley was on its knees by the turn of the 80s, and a combination of the Mulsanne Turbo, the Bentley 8 and the Turbo R really catapulted Bentley into the modern era. And if you look at how successful Bentley is today, it owes that success to those pioneering models of the 80s. The Turbo R was by far the best seller, but make no mistake that without an entry-level car like this Bentley 8, Bentley may not be even here today. That's quite an achievement. The owner of this example has had all the suspension updated. He's replaced all the dampers and everything, and you can just feel how beautifully tight and easy it is to drive. There's just something wonderfully appealing about an entry-level Bentley. But don't take my word for how good these cars are. Why don't we speak to Mark, the owner of this wonderful example, and he can tell us more about it.
Okay, so this is a 1987 Bentley 8. It was ordered by the general manager of Tesco's and run by the general manager of Tesco's, but paid for by and owned by Tesco themselves. So that tells you how much money Tesco were making. It's done about 88,000 miles, and it's got a remarkable service history, and it's a delight to drive. And the reason that I bought it, I did some research. I was originally, when I was at university, I went to the Scottish Car Show and drooled over these cars and always wanted one. I have multiple sclerosis, and I decided that this was on my bucket list. There's still a few little foibles. We're just getting little niggles out. There's a very nasty little dash rattle we've got to sort out, not least. But other than that, it's doing very well.
At sub £50,000, it would have still been way more expensive than similar cars from Jaguar or Mercedes, but this was ultimately one step above that. And if you could attract just some of those people into it, you can see why it was an appeal for the mark. I think even now this makes this a great classic proposition for a Bentley if you're in the market for one. Everyone will gravitate for a Turbo R, but if your budgets don't quite stretch to that, then go for one of these. They really are superb. Without the Bentley 8, you could argue that the brand might not even been here today. And for that part, it deserves its welcome place in Bentley history. It's a fabulous car. Absolutely love it.